If you've ever tried building your family tree, you've probably had a moment that felt something like this. Everything is going well. You find your grandparents, then your great-grandparents, maybe even another generation. You start thinking, I'm actually doing this. Then, without much warning, the trail ends. No explanation. No obvious mistake. Just nothing. Most people assume they did something wrong. Maybe they searched the wrong county. Maybe the name was misspelled. Maybe the records were destroyed. Sometimes that's true, but for millions of black families, something very different happened. And once you see it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. Over the last few years, historians and volunteers have helped make millions of handwritten records easier to search than ever before. Families are finding relatives in places they never thought to look, not because new history was created, but because old records are finally becoming easier to connect. That has changed how researchers approach Black genealogy today, especially with projects involving the Freedmen's Bureau and other Reconstruction-era records. That raises an interesting question. If more records are available than ever before, why do so many family trees still stop in almost the exact same place? The answer isn't hidden in one missing document. It's hidden in how America kept records. And once you understand that system, you'll stop asking, why can't I find my family? You'll start asking a much better question. What records was my family actually supposed to appear in? That one shift changes almost everything. Before we open a single census book, before we read a military file, before we visit a courthouse, we need to understand one simple idea. Records don't just tell us who people were. They tell us who someone believed was worth recording. That's the part most genealogy books skip. And it's the reason two families living on the same road, in the same year, can leave behind completely different paper trails. Tonight, we're going to follow one ordinary family through that system. Not because they're famous, not because their story is unusual, but because, in many ways, their story is the story millions of American families are still trying to piece back together. If you laid every government record from the 1800s across one long table, you would notice something almost immediately. The handwriting changes, the paper changes, the people writing the records change, but something else changes too. The questions. That's easy to overlook, but it's one of the most important clues in family history. Every record is really a list of questions someone thought were worth asking. Who owns this land? Who owes taxes? Who can vote? The answers tell us something about the people. The questions tell us something about the country. That's why experienced genealogists rarely start by asking, where's my ancestor? They start by asking, why was this record created? A marriage record exists because a couple wanted their marriage recognized. A military record exists because someone served. A probate file exists because property had to be transferred after someone died. Understanding why a record was made often matters more than what's written on the page. Now think about what that means for millions of Black Americans before and after the Civil War. The kinds of records that survive and the reasons they were created begin to change. After the war, families began appearing in labor agreements, marriage registers, school records, voter registrations, court proceedings, church minutes, and local tax records in ways that were less common before emancipation. Each collection captures only a small part of someone's life, but together they begin to form a much fuller picture. Historians and archivists continue improving access to many of these collections through ongoing digitization and transcription efforts. Imagine finding 5 documents from the same county. One tells you where a man worked. Another shows where his children went to school. A third records a marriage. None of those documents was created to tell his life story. Yet together, they reveal something much larger. They show a family building a life. That's one of the biggest surprises in genealogy. The story usually isn't hiding in a single record. It's hiding in the space between records. And sometimes the most valuable clue isn't your ancestor at all. It's the same neighbor appearing over and over again, or the minister who performed several family marriages, or the witness whose name keeps showing up beside yours. Researchers call this the fan club principle, studying a person's friends, associates, and neighbors to understand the community around them. It's a method used by professional genealogists because people rarely live their lives in isolation. When one person's trail grows faint, someone standing beside them may still leave a clearer path. That simple idea has helped solve family histories that once seemed impossible. In fact, some of the most important discoveries don't begin with the ancestor you're looking for. They begin with someone else's name, and that's where our search turns next. If I asked you to find a man you've never met, Where would you start? Most people would answer the same way. I'd look for his name. It makes sense. That's how we're taught to search. Type in a name. Add a birth year. Maybe a county. Then hope something appears. But experienced genealogists often do something that seems backward. Sometimes, they stop looking for the person they're trying to find. Instead, they begin looking for everyone around them. That sounds strange until you remember something simple. None of us lives alone. Think about your own life. Who would know your name? Your next-door neighbor. The people you worship with. The family who stood beside you at your wedding. The friend who signed as a witness when you bought a house. The people who worked beside you. If someone tried to rebuild your life 150 years from now, those people would leave clues about you, even when you didn't. The same was true in the 19th century. One family might disappear from a record. The neighbor might not. A church member might still be there. A minister might write down a marriage. A soldier might mention the same hometown years later in a pension application. Piece by piece, the community begins speaking for the people who left fewer records. This approach has become one of the most respected methods in genealogy. Researchers call it the fan principle, studying friends, associates, and neighbors, not because those people are more important than your ancestor, but because they often appear in records together. Once you start recognizing those patterns, entire communities begin to emerge instead of isolated names. Imagine you're researching a woman named Sarah. You know, she lived somewhere in Mississippi after the Civil War. You find her in one census. Then she disappears. That's where many searches stop. But what if Sarah's next-door neighbor appears again 10 years later, and that same neighbor witnesses a land sale, then serves on a local church committee? Suddenly, Sarah hasn't disappeared at all. You've simply been following the wrong person. This happens more often than people realize. Communities moved together, worked together, worshiped together. Some families remained neighbors for generations. Others migrated together into Arkansas, Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, or farther north after Reconstruction. The roads they traveled weren't random. That's one reason modern researchers spend so much time studying entire communities instead of a single surname. Because history rarely leaves us one perfect trail. It leaves footprints. And footprints make more sense when you can see everyone walking together. The family we've been following left very few records during one period of their lives. And that's where our search goes next. History tells us that after emancipation, millions of Black Americans were on the move. Some left to reunite with relatives they had been separated from. Some followed railroad jobs. Some joined new farming communities. Others moved because churches, schools, military service, or word of mouth promised new opportunities. Few families stayed completely still. And when they moved, their records moved with them. A family that seems to vanish from one county may appear just a few years later in another. A surname changes slightly. A child's age is recorded incorrectly. A clerk spells the name the way it sounded. Suddenly, it looks like a different family, but it isn't. The trail didn't end. It changed direction. That's why professional genealogists rarely trust a single record. They compare censuses with land records, church registers with tax rolls, military files with newspaper notices. One document asks a question, another answers it. And somewhere between those pages, a family begins to reappear. Because history doesn't always leave a straight path. Sometimes, it leaves a trail that's only visible when you stop looking for where someone was and start asking where they went next. On January 10, 1921, smoke was discovered inside the Commerce Department building in Washington, D.C. Firefighters flooded the basement where the 1890 census schedules were being stored. Some pages burned. Thousands more were damaged by smoke and water. For years it was repeated that the census had been completely destroyed in the fire. It was not. Surviving fragments remained, and historians urged their preservation. But in 1933, those remaining schedules were placed on a list of government records deemed unnecessary. Congress authorized their destruction, and most were discarded. Today, only 6,160 names survive from the 1890 Census General Population Schedules. Out of an entire nation. For Black families, that loss erased a critical bridge between Reconstruction and the 20th century. But the disappearance of records did not begin there. Long before the fire, federal census design already shaped what could be remembered. In 1850 and 1860, census takers were instructed to record enslavers by name, while listing enslaved people only by age, sex, and color. Not by name. The instructions were explicit. Numbers were to stand in place of identity. This was not a clerical mistake or damaged documentation. It was the system itself. A mother could appear as a number, her children listed beneath her. A family physically present on the page, yet stripped of names and relationships. The census counted them, but did not preserve them as a family. That is why 1870 marks such a rupture in the record. For the first time after emancipation, millions of Black Americans appear in named households. Husbands and wives, children and parents, relatives living nearby. The people had always existed as families. The record simply began to acknowledge them differently. Even so, the paper trail remained fragile. Across the South, courthouse records were lost to war, fire, flood, neglect, and in some cases deliberate destruction. Deed books, wills, court cases, tax lists, and marriage registers vanished in entire counties. These losses did not target Black history alone, but Black families were especially affected. In the early years of freedom, these records often contained the first legal recognition of land ownership, marriage, and community ties. When courthouses burned, those early traces of independence often disappeared with them. In other cases, the records were never created at all. Many Southern states did not consistently register births and deaths until the 20th century. The national birth registration system was not fully complete until 1933. As a result, entire lives could pass without a formal government record of birth or death. Families relied on memory, Bibles, and church records. The goal is not to guess. It is to reconstruct through accumulation. These are the lessons of the 1870 project.